So many of these people have outsourced their health care plan to Bernie Sanders, right? Because this is Bernie Sanders' plan. And it'll take private insurance away from more than half of the country, and they will reject that if we run on that.
That's former Congressman and current presidential candidate John Delaney Sunday on Face the Nation as he blasted the Medicare For All proposals of some of his Democratic rivals. He also added that he rejects decriminalization of border crossings.
Delaney was the first declared Democratic candidate, announcing back in July of 2017. At the time, he represented Maryland's 6th congressional district, chose not to run for re-election to focus on the presidential run. Mr. Delaney joins us now. There's a lot to dig into. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So, Congressman, let's begin with your overall candidacy here. From the Face the Nation interview and from your appearances on the debate stage, against Medicare for All, not for decriminalizing the border, you came out in support of TPP in that same interview. It really is kind of the neoliberal worldview that Joe Biden seems to embody. What do you think sets you apart from the former vice president? Because you both seem to be competing for that space.
Well, I just have new ideas. And I think that's what's very unique about my campaign, whether it's on climate, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on any of these really important issues about, how to create more economic security in our country. I have new ideas that I think are based on what's happening in the world, in the future, as opposed to what was happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think today you have to be thinking about how technology and global interconnection is changing everything in all of these areas, whether it be healthcare, economic security, climate, and you need plans based on that. So I think that's what really sets me apart from the rest of the field, is I have a whole bunch of new ideas. Now, it's probably the entrepreneur in me, because that's what I used to be before I ran for Congress. I've always been about new ideas and trying to build something new, and I think that's what my campaign is about.
So talk about that a little bit more. What do you see as the big challenges coming down the pipe that we're going to have to deal with that maybe Joe Biden doesn't understand the full nature of?
Well, one of the things is I think the economy is changing a lot. And technology and globalization is driving it. And so we have to be competing globally, but we also have to realize that it's going to be very dynamic in the United States. I think, I have 4 daughters. I think one of them might have 10 or 15 jobs across their careers. So you need to think differently about healthcare, about benefits, making sure they're portable. You need to think about retraining to make sure people are always getting the skills that they need. So I think that's an insight that I don't hear anyone else talking about, which is, what is really our economic plan based on what's happening in the world?
Well,
Climate's another example.
On that point, with globalization and automation,
yes,
right? You basically have workers competing against the lowest wage workers in the world and against robots, right?
Yes.
Which are becoming increasingly less expensive. So how do, for your daughters and for the next generation, how do you have jobs that support a middle class lifestyle given that level of competition?
You have to keep making sure people get more and more skills. Right, because what the robots basically do is take over or replace jobs that are highly kind of automatable, if you will, right? And so they're lower skills. So you have to make sure people have the skills they need.
So you're basically saying that the U.S. should become like a 100% service-based economy?
No, I think high-skilled manufacturing, if you look what's happening to manufacturing, we're having a bit of a manufacturing renaissance in this country, in part because labor is a much smaller percentage of the cost of manufacturing, and investment in machinery and equipment is a much bigger expense, and that actually favors bringing manufacturing back to the United States. But the people who work in manufacturing are much more skilled, because they're operating very, very expensive, very technical manufacturing equipment.
There's also a lot fewer of them, though,
right?
There are
fewer of them. That's the problem.
Many people.
Well,
that's
I think
the problem.
That's what the crux of what Chris and I are getting at here, which is how do you look at automation and you look at globalization and all that, and you say, yeah, let's enter into TPP or into another one of these multilateral trade agreements, which decimated the middle of the country, brought President Trump to office. What's your response to that?
My response was entering into these trade agreements was absolutely the right thing to do. We had no choice, right?
What, to do NAFTA? Yeah.
We had no. We actually had to engage. The mistake we made is we didn't invest locally. Right? My approach is to think globally, prepare ourselves to compete in a global economy, but make sure we're investing in communities. And that part we never did. We never did a national infrastructure program in this country. How long have we been talking about that? For decades. We should have had a $2 trillion national infrastructure program a long time ago. We should have required 25% of the government contractors in this country to have half of their employees in distressed communities. We don't actually need more government contractors in Bethesda, Maryland, or Marin County, California. We need them in these communities that are left behind. There's real things we could have done as a counterweight to the negative effects of globalization, and we could have gotten the benefits of globalization at the same time. But you need a strategy.
Yeah.
You made this really interesting comment in that Face the Nation interview right before Margaret Brennan wrapped the interview, but you said basically that you think whatever candidate is representing the Democrats has to be for TPP, because if you're not, that is basically a Trumpian view of the world. What do you mean by that?
So I think there's two views of the world. We isolate ourselves, and we only engage with other countries in a very narrow transactional basis. That's Trump, right? Build walls, tear up Paris, don't go in TPP, question NATO, but then do one-off deals. Or you have a view that the United States should be engaging with our allies, right? And working to have a seat at the table on every important conversation in the world. That's my approach. That's what TPP was about. TPP was about the United States leading in Asia. We were going to basically be at the head of a table that controlled 40% of the Asian economy. But so I think the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all these people were basically going down the Trumpian path to how we manage our economy.
Well, why is it Trumpian? Maybe it's just populist. Maybe it's just that there's a huge segment of our population that feels these anxieties, and that's why. I mean, that's why they're doing
it. You can call it anything you want, but it is his view of the world.
Yes.
And I just don't think how we actually argue there's an alternative if the person we put on the stage basically was supporting his policies.
Well, what's the
now they may not be separating children at the border, but effectively. It was isolating the country.
What do you think the constituency for your type of politics is? Because
center.
The center. Okay, well,
absolutely.
Why do you think you haven't been doing as well in the Democratic primary then?
Well, right now, the activists, Twitter, all that stuff is the voices that we're hearing. We all know that's how these primaries work. But I think most Democrats are where I am. Most Democrats are kind of pro-business, pro-worker, socially liberal, strong on national security, pro-trade. That's what I think most Democrats are. That's what I think most Americans are. But we've allowed these extremes to effectively hold this country hostage for way too long.
But on the other hand, Medicare for All polls very well. And now I know that taking people's insurance away, we can debate that on the side. Private insurance, taking that away, does not poll very well. But
Terribly.
The idea of Medicare for All, the idea of let's take this program that works really well and that people love and are comfortable with, and let's expand it, that polls really well. So what's the problem with that?
Because Medicare for All really has nothing to do with Medicare. It's a great slogan. They get super high marks for a good slogan. And everyone was afraid to say something about it.
You're a businessman, though. Doesn't that matter?
It does matter to a point. But see, the thing is, the Republicans are going to spend $1 billion explaining exactly what this is to the American people. All the other Democrats were afraid to challenge Senator Sanders on this. And they just got right behind him on this. But Medicare, for example, does not exclude private insurance. In fact, about 80% of Medicare beneficiaries have private insurance in one form or fashion, either by choosing Medicare Advantage, which is a straight private insurance program, or by choosing a supplemental plan. So imagine running on something where we go to our seniors and tell them that 80% of them have to fundamentally change their Medicare? Like, this is crazy.
Well,
literally, it's a crazy proposal.
I also want to talk to you about immigration. You're one of the few who came out against decriminalizing the border, something that has really swept both stages in those primaries. Why is it that you decided to hold that view whenever it seems that the activist base of the party is completely in a different direction?
I just don't think at this moment in time, when we have a huge kind of surge at our border, right, sending a message that we're going to decriminalize crossings is the right thing to do. And the basis that people are using to say we should decriminalize our border is that was used to allow
zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance. Well, my view is let's just fix that. Let's pass a law saying that children cannot be separated from their parents, which is the law that I'm in favor of. You can do that, and you don't have to decriminalize border crossings. And I just don't think decriminalizing border crossings, when we clearly have a crisis at our southern border, we clearly have a massive amount of migration. I mean, I was there. My wife and I were at the border a couple months ago, helping asylum seekers make their case. So I saw firsthand, these people are actually coming for very legitimate reasons. Unless we stabilize what's going on in those countries, we're going to continue to see this refugee crisis.
Do you think that we should have more legal immigration?
Yes.
Do you think the amount that we have is about right? Or
I think we should have more.
We should have more. How much more?
That's debatable by the Congress, but you have to remember, the worst thing for a country is to shrink. The worst thing economically. Like if you look at Russia, if you look at Japan, these are countries that are shrinking because their birth rates are not self-sustainable and they don't have welcoming immigration policies. So they're shrinking. So imagine your country's getting older, you have all these obligations, and you have no new workers to effectively pay the bills.
Well,
that's an economic disaster. We, for the first time, are starting to see a pretty dramatic decline in our birth rate in this country.
Well, so
we need immigrants.
I agree with this, but why is it that immigration is the solution to the fertility problem and not like pro-fertility policy by the United States government?
I don't think the government should legislate fertility, Paul. I mean, I just look at the facts.
Well, it shouldn't encourage fertility?
No, I just think, I think we want to be a growing economy. And I think it's pretty obvious to be a growing economy, we need immigrants. We've always had immigrants to fuel the growth of this economy. It's our business model. It really works, actually. Everyone wants to come here. I mean, obviously we need a controlled legal immigration process. But if you think about it, about 80 or 90% of the people around the world wake up and want to come to the United States of America every day. Imagine if you're running a company and 80 to 90% of the people in your field want to work at your company. How big of an advantage you would view that as. That's what we have. We shouldn't throw that out. That's a huge advantage.
So what's the game plan? How do you get from here to the Oval Office?
Well, we got the next debate coming up. I mean, I think it's...
Have you qualified?
Have you qualified for the September ones?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Working on that. I just still think it's wide open. I mean, look what happened to the Vice President a couple weeks ago, or last week, whatever it was. I mean, this thing's wide open.
What in your view happened?
I just think what happened is what happens in these races.
Yeah.
You go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. New people get identified, pop up, all these kind of things.
Do you think his campaign is permanently damaged?
No.
Yeah.
I don't have that much insight into his campaign. My point is, it just shows that this thing is pretty darn volatile.
All right.
Very interesting.
Thank you,
Always
sir.
great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Sir. Butter cows, fairs, and festivals. The 2020 Democratic candidates hit the ground running, by the way. Congressman Delaney gave us a chuckle over that one over the holiday weekend, and a couple more may throw their names into the ring. One a Democrat, another a newly minted independent.
We will talk with Scott Dworkin, co-founder of the Democratic Coalition, series editor of Meet the Candidates 2020, next on Rising.